This week we are learning Parsha Netzavim. Just imagine, the year is 2488, which means it's 3293 years ago. Because right now we are completing the year 5781 of Jewish calendar. On the 7th of Adar, the final day of his earthly life, Moshe gathered all Israelites, men, women, and children, to re-enter them into the covenant with God, the agreement with God. This covenant established the Israelites as God's exclusive nation, the chosen people, the general statement. And the covenant, Moses explained, was not limited to those who were physically present on that day. Rather, it included all future generations of Jews as well, including you and me and everybody else who lives right now. That means all of us are basically signed up to this covenant. Moshe warned the Israelites not to be tempted by the idolatrous lifestyles of the Egyptians or any other of the nations which they will pass through in course of their travels, right when they will start conquering the land of Israel, because they are basically at the border. He warned of the dire consequences which will befall the individuals, families, and tribes, or even the whole nation, if they forsake the covenant with God. Moses tells the Jewish people that the Torah is inside them, inside their heart, and that they have been given a free choice to choose between good and evil, life and death, which free choice is given to everybody, not only Jews. Their choice will determine whether they are the beneficiaries of God's blessings or the sufferers of God's curses. And Moshe implores the Israelites to choose life. And that's the basic content of this parsha. Let's look a little bit deeper into all of this, because there are, as far as I'm concerned, there are more questions than answers really in this parsha. As I said, Moshe renews the covenant of God with Israel. And he is very careful not to limit his words just to those people who actually present in front of him, which is the whole nation. He knows he's about to die this day. He wants to ensure that no future generation can say, Moses made a covenant with our ancestors. Fine, but not with us. We didn't give our consent, our agreement. We are not bound by this agreement, by this covenant. So in order to preclude this, he says the following words. It is not with you alone that I am making this sworn covenant, but with whoever is standing here with us today before the Lord our God, and with whoever is not here with us today. As the commentators point out, the phrase whoever is not here cannot really refer to the Israelites alive at the time who happened to be somewhere else. Because the entire nation was assembled. It's specifically spelled out in preceding sentences that entire nation was assembled there. It can only mean generations not yet born. Well, hold on. The covenant bound all Jews from that day to this day, to today. But agreeing to be God's people, subject to God's laws, our ancestors obligated us? Is that fair? One of the most fundamental facts about Judaism, except converts. Converts make their conscience decision to become Jews. None of us who were born from Jewish mother, we did not choose to be Jews. We are born as Jews. We become legal adults subject to the commands, and we accept responsibilities for our actions at the age of 12 for girls and 13 for the boys. As we know, the bat mitzvah and bar mitzvah. But we are part of the covenant from birth, not at the age of 12 and 13, because a bar or batem or bar mitzvah is not a confirmation like it is in the Catholic faith, for instance. It involves no voluntary acceptance of Jewish identity. The choice took place then, 3,000 years ago, and it is passed on to you when you are born by a Jewish mother. That's it. But how it can be so in that case? Surely a fundamental principle of Judaism is that there is no obligation without consent, without agreement. How can we be bound by an agreement to which we were not parties? How can we be subject to a covenant on the basis of a decision taken long ago, more than 3,000 years ago, and by our faraway, distant ancestors whom we never saw at this point in time? The sages, after all, raised very similar questions about the wilderness generation in the days of Moses, who were actually there but did not give their consent, agreement to the covenant. Do you realize that Talmud suggests that they were not entirely free to say no at the foot of Mount Sinai when they were receiving the Torah? In Gemara we read that the Holy One, blessed be He, suspended the whole mountain over them like a barrel and said to them, and I quote, "If you say yes, all will be well. But if you say no, this will be your burial place." You can find it in Shabbat 88b, Avodah Zarah 2b 15. Sages say that this constitutes a fundamental challenge to the legitimacy of the whole covenant. God put a gun basically in front of more than 3 million people and said to them, you will all die if you disagree, if you don't want to accept the Torah. Well, the Talmud replies that even though the agreement may not have been entirely free at the time of Mount Sinai, but Jews later on reconfirmed their consent to the covenant voluntary in the days of Ahasuerus, the Assyrian king, and suggested, and as stated basically in the book of Esther, which we read on Purim. Well, many sages believed with great force that an agreement must be free to be binding. Yet we did not agree to be Jews, most of us still born Jews. We were not there in Moses' days when an agreement was made, and we did not even exist. How that can be bound? How can we be bound in that case by the covenant? How can Jewish identity be passed on from parent to child? If Jewish identity were merely racial or ethnic, we could probably understand it. But there are so many Jews, different colors, different ethnicities around the world, and we are all Jews. We inherit many things from our parents, most obviously our genes, and by being Jewish, it's not genetic condition. It is a set of religious, philosophical, and lifestyle obligations which we follow. So there is a halakhic principle which says you can confer a benefit on someone else without their knowledge or consent. But being Jewish, we have a huge number of obligations, responsibilities, not benefits. Big conundrum, big problem. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, in his book Covenant and Conversations, in his article called Why Be Jewish, is answering this question. He says, for the most part, over the generations, Jews did not ask the question, why be Jewish? The answer was obvious to them. My parents are Jewish, my grandparents were Jewish, so I am Jewish. Identity is something most people in most ages take for granted. It did, however, first time became a serious issue during Babylonian exile. This is when the first temple was destroyed and Jews were taken into exile, into slavery. The prophet Ezekiel said, what is it in your mind shall never happen that shall never happen? They thought, let us be like the nations, like the tribes of the countries, and worship wood and stone. This is the first reference in Jewish history to Jews actively seeking to abandon their Jewish identity and to become like other nations, idol worshippers, to worship wood and stone. It later on happened again in rabbinic times. We know that in the 2nd century, before Common Era, before Christian era, there were Jews who were Hellenized, seeking to become Greek rather than Jewish. There were others who, under the Roman rule, sought to become Roman rather than Jewish. Some even underwent an operation to reverse the effects of their circumcision. In Hebrew, they were known as Meshukim, and they were simply trying by surgery to hide the fact that they were circumcised in order to participate, for instance, in Olympic Games, naked. The third time Jews were questioning their allegiance to the covenant and being Jewish was in Spain in the 15th century. Yeah, I'm talking Queen Isabella and Ferdinand, when they basically offered 3 choices to the Jews: either leave the country, or we will kill you, or change to Christianity. And this was taking place between 1391 and 1492. And there was immense pressure from the Inquisition as well on Spanish Jews to convert to Christianity. And many, very many did. Maybe 1/3 has done so. They were later on known as, in Hebrew, as Anusim, in Spanish the converses, and derogatively they were called maranas, swine. The question is, why stay Jewish was very real. The answers given were different at different times. Ezekiel's answer was very blunt. And he said the following on behalf of God, because he was a prophet. As I live, declares Lord God, surely with a mighty hand and outstretched arm, and with wrath poured out, I will be king over you. In other words, Jews might try to escape their destiny, but they will fail. That's what Ezekiel was saying. Even against their will, they would be known as Jews. Tragically, this happened actually quite often in 15th century Spain, 19th century Europe, and 20th century Europe resulted in Holocaust. In both cases, racial anti-Semitism persisted, and Jews continued to be persecuted and killed just because they are Jews. The sages answered the question mystically. This is during the rabbinical times. And they were saying, even the souls of Jews not yet born were present at Sinai. And the souls, you and me and everybody else who were not born at the time, we ratified the covenant. That's what they were saying. You can find that in Exodus Rabbah 28:6. Every Jew, in other words, did give his or her consent on the days of Moses, even though they had not yet been born. Well, demystifying this, perhaps the sages meant that in his or her innermost heart, even the most assimilated Jew knew that he or she was still a Jew. That seems to have been the case with figures like Henry Heine, Benjamin Disraeli, who lived as Christians, but very often wrote and thought and acted as Jews. The 15th century Spanish commentators found this answer problematic. They said, we are each of us, each human being, we have got a body and a soul. And even if it is sufficient to say that our soul was present at Sinai, how can the soul obligate the body? Of course, the soul agrees to the covenant spiritually, because soul is spiritual, to be a Jew, which is a privilege, and you can bestow privilege on someone without their consent. But what about the body? To follow the covenant is very difficult. It's a burden. It involves all sorts of restrictions and physical pleasures. You must be circumcised, which is a process. You must eat only kosher food. You cannot mix meat and milk, and all sorts of limitations. Therefore, if souls of the future generations were present, but not their bodies, that will not constitute a consent. Well, Rabbi Sachs, God bless his soul, says perhaps there is a much simpler explanation. Not every obligation that binds us in one to which we have already freely given our agreement. There are obligations that come with birth, he says. The classic example, let's say a crowned prince. Crowned prince, royalty. To be the heir to the throne involves a set of duties and a life of service to the others. It is possible to neglect these duties. We know that happens quite often, actually, nowadays. In extreme circumstances, it is even possible for the monarch to abdicate, and we know in situations when that did take place. But no one chooses to be heir to the throne. That is fate and destiny that comes with birth. The people to whom God himself said, "My child, my firstborn Israel," know themselves to be royalty, chosen people. That may be a privilege. It may be a burden. It may be both at the same time. It is a delusion to think that the only significant things about us are those which we choose. For the truth is somewhat very basic. The most important facts about us we did not choose. We did not choose to be born, first of all. We did not choose our parents. We did not choose the time when we will be born or the place in what country we will be born. Yet each of these factors affects who we are, what we are called, and how we develop, and what our obligations and rights are, and what we called upon to do. We are part of a story that began long before we were born. And this story will continue after we are no longer here. And the question for all of us is very simple. Will we continue this story? Just think about it. The hopes of 100 generations of our ancestors rest on our willingness to do so, to continue their story. Deep in our collective memory, the words of Moses continue to resonate with us. At least with those of us who think about it. It is not with you alone that I am making this sworn covenant, but with whoever is not here with us today. We are part of this story. We can live it or we can abandon it. But it is a choice we cannot avoid, and it has immense consequences. It has got immense consequences for the future of the covenant of Jewish people, and to a considerable degree, it has got huge consequences for all of humanity. And the responsibility rests with us, with you and me. Shabbat Shalom. In the end of this, I want to add a little note. I'm going to switch on the comments, because I would appreciate of you guys to say to me whether you want me to continue with this series of Torah blogs or you want me to stop, because we are finishing the Torah cycle, and I must admit it takes a lot of effort every week to prepare, and I'm getting older. So please comment and let me know what you think. Goodbye, and again, Shabbat Shalom.
ערננו לתורתך, ודבק ליבנו במצוותיך, ויחל לבבנו ליאהבה וליראה את שמך.